Friends, as we look into the book of Esther, one of the reasons why Rick did read some details around the word pur, is how you say it, P-U-R, is a little bit of Jewish information. They celebrate the festival of Purim that came out of this period of time. And part of that festival is a lot of having fun together, dressing up together, and remembering that the lines can often get blurred between good and evil within human beings, that we lose track of ourselves, we get power drunk, we do things that we think we would never have done, but we kind of, and so that's the goal of that festival, is to be aware of our humanity and our need of having God central in our lives. So today's text, between Haman and Mordecai, I think the common theme that comes up for preaching is power. And power is not something that we maybe talk about a lot, but we all feel the result of power. You feel it when you've had a boss who made you feel small. Maybe you've had that situation. When you've been in a conversation with someone who all of a sudden pulls rank or acts like they're the expert in a field, just all of a sudden they reveal that to you. Or when you sit in a room and you think to yourself, I don't really matter here. That's a power struggle. That's a dynamic that you live with. And if you've never felt any of those power struggles, well, you might be one of the ones everyone's talking about, okay? So just, deal with that too this morning. Now, for some of you, I think power struggles show up in big ways at your workplaces. For some of you, it's school, like with our teenagers, it can be in their friend groups and just the peer pressure that Susie talked about and trying to fit in, all those things. For others, it can be in your family dynamics. There's always people with and without power, though I think poor Travis this morning was called out for parenting. So, but even parenting, sometimes we can get a little power hungry too, and we have to apologize to our kids when we get a little too far to the control side. I've been there. But I'm just saying, I wanted to give Travis a little parent nod this morning. For some of us, it's that sense that your influence isn't what it used to be. But power shows up in all kinds of ways, and all of us deal with it. And Esther 3 gives us an honest picture specifically of how the abuse of power works. Now, friends, I felt led to preach on Esther last summer when I was making sermon plans for this entire year. I just plugged it in after Easter. I thought, that'll be fun. Esther, we can talk about some human things and some dynamics between human beings, and it'll be an interesting focus on how we can better follow Christ in our lives and focus on a biblical character. But here we are. I guess I should have known that we would always be dealing with some of these very human topics in here. So that being said, I've done a lot of research around this. I helped build the curriculum for our camping programs last year that studied Esther. And so I have added a podcast to the list of things that I do. And on Monday mornings, I've only done it once, so hopefully I'll keep doing it. Maybe saying it out loud will hold me accountable. My goal is to share some of the overflow of things that don't make it into the sermon, but that might interest you about the passage. So if you want to check that out, you can look me up on Substack. If you go to the church Facebook page, there's a link there, or in your email, there's a link if you want to check that out. But I'm trying. I did 20 minutes of talking to myself in my office, and that was enough. So we'll see. I hope I'll be less awkward as we go. All right, let's pray. Oh God, may the words of my mouth and the meditations of all of our hearts be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. A quick recap as we begin. Remember, the book of Esther does not explicitly mention God. The reader is invited to do the work of looking for God throughout this story and throughout these different characters. The time period is the 400s BC. The Persians are ruling what we refer to as the Middle East these days, the part of the world that houses modern-day Syria, Lebanon, Kuwait, Israel, Saudi Arabia, Iran, and Iraq. The Jewish people have been scattered all over the land. Now, this was the practice of the Persians. Every time they took over one of these nation states, they would take the most powerful leaders in that little nation that they took over and make them move all over their empire. That way, that new nation could not organize and reclaim their borders. This was their tactic. The other thing that was interesting about the Persians was that they took a pluralistic approach to governing. The Babylonians before them did not. If the Babylonians took you over, you became Babylonian in every way. But the Persians, they accepted some and had some tolerance for different kinds of religions and different ways of thinking and different people groups. Now, according to Esther, King Xerxes had a 180-day party, followed by a 7-day banquet. So he is mega wealthy and he really likes to show it off. He also wants to show off his wife, Queen Vashti. He commands her to come and show off her beauty, and surprisingly, she says no. Now, this is the king's kind of moment of going into chaos, because the king is used to getting what he wants, when he wants it, how he wants it. So he has a little bit of a political tantrum alongside his political leaders, and they say, oh no, if the queen can say no to the king, then all women everywhere are going to start saying no. And so they make a law that women can't say no. And they feel really good about that situation. Now, as a result, King Xerxes needs a new queen. And so he decides that the most important feature of a new queen is that she is beautiful. So he puts out a notice across the kingdom saying, all beautiful women are to come to me, and I'm going to have a beauty contest, and I'm going to decide who the new queen will be. Well, Esther is among the women who is summoned. She is a beautiful woman. She's Jewish. She's being raised by her cousin Mordecai. And Mordecai warns her. He says, don't tell them about who you are. Don't tell them that you're Jewish. And so she gets sent to the king, and we're told that all these summoned women are collected to the king, and they spend months getting fattened up, essentially, because they're starving to death and being treated for cosmetic issues so that they are ready to be presented to the king. So this gives us another clue that even though Xerxes is mega wealthy, his people are mega suffering. They're hurting. They're struggling day by day. So we're told that Esther wins, that she becomes the next queen, and then Mordecai tells her about a plot that he hears where the king is going to be killed. So she tells the king and saves the day, and the king likes Mordecai, and the king likes Esther, and all is well. And then the very next thing that happens is where we are today. One of the king's supervisors, a man named Haman. Now, if we were Jewish, we would instantly go, boo, Haman, boo. That's what they do in the festival of Purim when they retell this story of Esther. Every time they say Haman, there you go, that's a little bit enthusiastic. That's what happens in the story. And I think that's one way they keep the kids engaged, but it also, it sits in them as part of their identity and who they are. So Haman, you don't have to do that every time, don't do it. Haman gets elevated and promoted, and he's given authority on behalf of the king. And Haman really loves it. He's like pretty stoked about his new role. He's really excited that he's going to be in charge. And then the king says, not only is Haman in charge, but like everybody's got to bow to him because, anybody who's in charge wants people to bow to them. And so everyone does, except for one person, Mordecai, Esther's cousin. Now, because we, the reader, are able to read this story, and like I said, God is not mentioned in this story, we know enough about Jewish people to know why Mordecai refused to bow. Susie mentioned that to us with the kids, because as Jewish people, they only bow to God. And so we know that as the reader leaning into the story, but Haman doesn't know that. He doesn't get that. Mordecai doesn't even offer a speech or an explanation or an announcement. He just simply refuses to bow. And that one decision sets everything else into motion. Interestingly, though, I don't know if you heard this as Rick was reading it. It was a quick moment. Haman doesn't see Mordecai until someone else points him out. Isn't that fascinating? He doesn't see Mordecai until someone else points it out to him. And if I'm honest, this part kind of hits me a little bit in the heart. I don't want to relate to Haman, but I do relate to him on this one point. I'm one of those people that I can get 15 encouraging comments and one really discouraging one, and that's the one I hang on to. I hold on to that discouraging comment. I think about it over and over again. I wonder what I could do about that thing. Anybody else like that? Now, I see that in Haman in this moment, that he's feeling pretty good about himself, and then there's one guy that's not bowing down, and he didn't even see that guy, but someone pointed it out, and now he can't not see it, right? Every time Haman goes down the street, all he sees is that Mordecai is standing there. But Haman's power issue is a lot deeper than what I just described to you. Haman doesn't just want authority. He wants people to bow. He wants people to worship him. He wants people to give him a blank check of authority. He wants to be seen. His authority, his power, is, shall we say, fragile and insecure. And when Mordecai won't do it, we're told that he gets furious. Not a little bit annoyed or put out or even sad that one guy won't bow to him. Furious. Rather than letting the one guy get away with resisting, Haman starts to draw lines. He says, you're either with me or you're not, because Haman's power insists on control. Now, we've definitely all experienced that. We've seen it in leaders and organizations on a national stage. Haman goes to the king and reframes this whole situation to him. He says, there's this group of people, not there's this one guy, but there's this group of people. They're different, and they don't follow the rules. And just like that, this becomes bigger than Mordecai, and a personal offense turns into a public threat, turns into a proclamation of a coming genocide, being told by all the other people in the nation that they are to kill their Jewish neighbors and friends, not to differentiate between men and women and children, to take care of them all. Friends, this is genocide by definition. What starts with one man turns into a plan to destroy an entire people. Power struggles, friends, result sometimes in decisions that affect whole groups of people. They result in systems that can be used to protect some while harming others. Different details, but the same pattern. Power being used to protect itself, to elevate itself, to control others, especially anyone who is different. And then the king hands Haman his signet ring. No questions, just blind, lazy authority. So not only do we have twisted power, we have lazy authority. So it's worth asking in this moment in the sermon, where do I see the abuse of power? What about in myself? Where do I give in? How do I resist? How do I sometimes exert my power over others? Because we're not just reading the story of Esther just for kicks and grins, like I thought last summer. We're reading it because we're in it. This is a story about humans, about relationships, about abuse of power, about triumph, about the twistedness and complexities of human relationships and people. This past week in my Bible study, one member of the Bible study who had told me last week that she never read Esther before, went ahead and read all of Esther, and she said, well, Pastor Sarah, what are you going to do about the fact that at the end of this, Esther and Mordecai end up turning the tables, and they become the oppressors? And I was like, we'll see when we get there. It's my easy way out of that one. And we will. We're going to talk about that too. We're going to get into that too. So while we're thinking about Esther, let's also look in the mirror. Let's look around us. But it's important that anytime we look around us, we start with us and where we are in the midst of these things. And this is also where I personally need to take a turn to really reflect deeply as a follower of Jesus, recognizing that the people in this room, all of you, are people trying to follow Jesus. And we remember that Jesus redefines power. Following Jesus doesn't mean that you become passive in the face of unhealthy or destructive power. It doesn't mean saying yes when you know you shouldn't. Sometimes faithfulness is saying no. Sometimes it looks like not bowing like Mordecai. That we are in fact empowered by God through our baptisms to resist evil, injustice, and oppression in whatever forms they present themselves. Friends, Jesus had all authority. If anyone deserved to be bowed to, it was Jesus. And yet Jesus kneels, taking on the role of a servant, washing the feet of his disciples, serving. Haman says, "Bow to me." And I can't help but compare that to Jesus, who says, "Let me serve you." And this matters because Jesus isn't passive. He confronts what's wrong. He challenges people in power. He tells the truth, even when it costs him. But he does it differently. You see, the world uses power to crush enemies. Jesus uses power to give himself for them. Jesus stands against evil without becoming it. Because you don't fight fire with fire. You fight fire with water. Remember, friends, that the cross does not look like weakness. That in God's kingdom, the last are first and the weak are made strong, the vulnerable are protected and the greatest serve. Power becomes twisted in stories like we just heard today when it becomes about control. And I think that's really the question that this chapter leaves me with, at least in this moment. Not just who has the power, because that's easy to do. It's easy to point at the people with the power and not recognize our part in that. But rather maybe how we use the power that we have. Esther 3, chapter 3, is showing us how power usually works. But Jesus invites us into something very different.